the service industry for about 7 years.
Boobs!
Hello everyone, this is ChampiMan90. Ugh! Damn it, I can't see a thing in this.
And it always really bothered me when people would correct me when I said Happy Holidays and tell me to say Merry Christmas.
It couldn't possibly be because it was Christmas time now, could it, Jade? Hey? Hey?
As I've gotten older, the holidays have went from being a really happy and joyous time to a time full of racist and xenophobic comments.
Wow, that escalated quickly. I mean, it couldn't possibly be because you've been indoctrinated by social justice, communism, Marxism, although technically those two are linked and related, but who cares? There is some kind of difference. What else are we there? Ah, yes, intersectionality, your own racism, your own bigotry. Yeah, everything is racist according to you when it comes to the holiday season. You know, Christmas. Christmas is now racist. You know, it couldn't possibly be because you've been brainwashed to see everything as racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, and according to Nate Sarkeesian, you have to point that out. It's totally not that. It totally is at Merry Christmas, and Christmas itself is racist and homophobic and all that shit. Am I right, Jade? Am I right?
Xenophobia is the irrational fear of foreigners.
We know what that means, but I think you'll find that most of the people you will be referring to will most likely be American. But never mind.
Whether this fear is rooted in a political, social, individual, economic, or cultural agenda.
Lol, speech impediment has reared its ugly head once more. Thankfully I've got the boobs to look at to ignore it. Psych, I'm not going to ignore it. I'm just going to rip into it again, like I do. Yes, we know what xenophobia is. We know all about it. We've been told about it. We've been taught about it. Hell, I have probably been the subject of it, even though I am not a foreigner in my own country. Technically speaking, of course. But hey, appearances suggest otherwise, right? Hey? Hey?
People make xenophobic claims like if people don't like our cultures and customs here, then they can go back to the country they came from. Completely neglect the fact that the prosperity of the Western world is dependent on the exploitation and systematic underdevelopment of other countries.
That doesn't quite work. Sorry, you're comparing apples and oranges there, and I'm going to explain why. Firstly, it is logical to suggest that if these people genuinely do not like living in this country, then maybe, yeah, they should go. If they don't like our values, if they don't like our system, if they don't like our way of life, maybe they should go. There's no use just being here, living here, and not contributing and hating everyone. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, does it? Why would one move here? Not that I think, that these people are the norm. These people who come to a country and dislike everything. No, they're like 1% or something. Not even that. But who cares? And then you're saying that the Western world depends on the exploitation of third world countries. Yeah, no, it's not the Western world that relies on it. It's the companies that have gone over there and set up factories and other kind of places that build their products. You see, 100 years ago, in my country, they used to exploit their own people. In my city, Manchester, we used to have textile factories, and in some cases, at one point, we even had a coal pit in North Manchester, and we exploited our own people. We exploited anyone who would live in Manchester. Yeah, even people who came over to our country and lived in Manchester. Back in those days, it would have been Jewish and maybe other immigrants. I can't remember exactly now what the immigration was back then, but Irish, yes. Irish and Jews were exploited, as well as the English people who lived in Manchester. Italians too at one point in Ancoats. These people were exploited by the factory owners and the companies and the corporations because they were cheap and they would work for anything because they lived in squalid conditions. But since the industry is left and that the companies found it a lot cheaper and easier to go and move their bases overseas, we have seen that decrease. Instead, these people are now either unemployed or working in service industries. Retail, call centres, offices, where they're exploited by the same types of organisations, that it's just the service is different. So you can't really say that. And then you've got those other third world countries that have businesses over here, and they're exploiting us too. You know? There's Indian companies over here, there's Chinese companies over here, and in America and Canada as well, exploiting our people. Yet you neglect to mention that, and you also neglect to mention that overwhelmingly it's their own people that are neglected more by their corporations. They're going through a similar revolution that we did. So I find that idea a bit ludicrous, girl. It doesn't quite help, but of course nuance is not needed in such a stupid argument as this.
Canada and America have multiple immigration policies, trade agreements, and global structures like the International Monetary Fund as well as the World Bank that put infrastructures in place that benefit North America over other countries.
You keep doing this every time, Jaded. They are two completely different countries. They're actually competitors on the world stage when it comes to economics and trade. These two would find it a lot easier to make it easier for one or the other than it is for both. Because what if Canada starts making more money than America in this deal? Then America has to try and sort its own shit out. No, they're not doing this ulterior conspiracy to make everything worse for the rest of the world, but everything easier than for them. You do realise that North America is more than just two countries, right? You have distinct lack of geographical skills, and again you keep making them out to be the same country with the same motivations and the same ideologies, which they do not. Canada will do what's best for Canada, and America will do what's best for America. Countries work that way. They don't tend to work for each other's benefit. Sure, they have trade agreements with each other in other countries, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're doing it to, shit on everyone else. This is just conspiracy mumbo-jumbo from you. It's just an assertion.
Actually, often at the cost of the development of those countries.
Citation needed because America and Canada and the rest of the Western world give millions and billions of aid to third world and second world developing countries. They give a lot of aid. Britain alone gives millions to India, and India doesn't necessarily need that money anymore because now they're a top 10 economy. So, again, the facts do not back your claim up. What has this got to do with Christmas, Jade? Seriously, this is bullshit. If you wanted to talk about economics and trade, make a video about economics and trade. This is meant to be about the festive period, for fuck's sake.
Such programs and organizations first target the human and cultural capital of non-Western countries.
Citation needed. Using a country's labour force does not mean they are targeting them and trying to take them over. Not necessarily.
An attempt to bring immigrants here for cheap labour.
Wait, so the countries are trying to create programs and other things to bring immigrants over for cheap labour? Okay. Well, what if these immigrants are already coming here anyway without the need for said programs? The only program I can ever think of was the British Empire after the end of World War II. That we needed to rebuild the mother country, so we asked British citizens, well, subjects, but hey, I'm a subject too. We're all subjects, technically. In places like Jamaica, the rest of the Caribbean, India, Hong Kong, all sorts of places that we owned temporarily, because after that they all began to gain independence, to come over and help rebuild the country and take jobs that would have been filled by the dead soldiers, because we had a manpower shortage and we had a money shortage. That's the only programme I can think of, and even then, we much preferred German POWs to stay over and European refugees to fill those boots rather than our own people. Yes, they are our own people despite the colonial subjugation. They did have British passports. So, I find this idea of what you're saying a bit silly, and I need another citation, please.
Second, they put political and economic systems in place that benefit North America.
Again, North America is not a country. They're all like loads of different countries all together that have their own different policies and politics and motivations. They do not all work for the same thing. They do not. Canada, Mexico, and the US, just to name the three big North American countries, are at competition with each other. They might have trade agreements and alliances, but that does not necessarily mean that are using this to benefit North America. They're not. You're a fucking idiot. North America is not a country. It is not like the EU, where that is not a country, but it is a trade organisation that is slowly becoming a bit too much like a country anyway, which benefits the countries within that said federation, where basically we trade with each other, we have a free movement, we can use each other's resources, etc, etc. And it's more of a competition to North America and Asia and South America, really. That is something that you're describing. That is not happening in North America. The three countries are at odds with each other, technically, in trade and competition. Jesus Christ. I don't know what you're talking about. This is horse shit.
While denying the needs and rights of the people that actually live in those countries.
It's not the governments that are necessarily doing that. It's the corporations who are doing this. The Western world lives in a free market capitalist society, right? Which means that corporations are almost above governments in a way. I mean, just look at the bloody TPP deal that's coming out right now. That's not just America and Canada. That is other countries that need the Pacific as some kind of trade thing. But it doesn't matter. It's far too complicated to understand. But it's not just those two countries. This free market capitalist society means that corporations can almost do whatever they want, okay? They can do what almost they want. So these corporations are going out there out of their own accord and making businesses and factories and opening shops using those labour forces that you apparently are caring about, but you clearly do not care about them, really, do you? Because you're on here on YouTube whining about it but not doing anything to deal with the problem. You're not giving me a solution. You're just complaining about Christmas and then putting all this shit in to basically attack Christmas and say why we should say happy holidays. But you've not actually said anything like that. And besides, I have one last question. If you think Canada is such an amazingly conspiratorial government, right, then name me one corporation from Canada that is massive, that really we would not run the world without it, because I can't think of any Canadian corporation. I could give you a list of loads of American ones. General Motors, United Fruit Company. What else have we got? Apple, Microsoft. What's Canada got? Fuck all. I can't think of anything.
NAFTA is my favorite example to use because it's one of the only, if not the only, trade agreement that exists between two rich countries and a poor one. After the implication of NAFTA, the
They signed this agreement because they needed some economic help. Basically, it was their fault in not trying to invest so that they could handle the competition from the world, yet alone the US and Canada. They did not invest in railways and they did not invest in equipment, which meant that their farmers suffered. It was their own fault. It was not NAFTA's fault. It was not America and Canada's fault. And even then, all countries managed to have a rise in GDP as a result of this agreement. I'm not a corporatist, but you can't deny the facts.
We could also look at the live-in care program in Canada, as well as similar programs in both Canada and the States that target Filipino individuals to come here to work as domestics, nurses, and nurses' aides.
What has this got to do with Christmas and why we should call it Happy Holidays? I'm sorry, but I would love to debate you on this, but I have no idea what you're talking about, and this has nothing to do with Christmas or the holiday season. It has literally nothing. I thought we were going to be discussing that, but you're just making this an anti-corporatist rant, and it's just basically off topic.
Many people use the live-in care program as a way to get citizenship. However, the program stipulates that individuals have to live with their employers, which creates really unfair and unequal power dynamics.
Okay, I still don't know what this has to do with Christmas and xenophobia, but do go on. If anything, this is just exploitation of workers, which has happened to Canadian and US citizens as well. So, please, you're talking out your ass here. Can we please get back on topic?
Moreover, However, the problem with these programs more generally is that they require that people that utilize the program have really high levels of education. As a result, these programs often drain the human and cultural capital of their host countries.
Yeah, because those countries are poor and most likely do not have the money or are too corrupt to invest in infrastructure which would have kept those people. Remember, these are poor countries for a reason. There are various reasons why they're poor. It's not just down to exploitation from the West. It's also down to exploitation of their governments, the resources that they have available to them, all sorts. It's not just one thing, it's various different factors. And the fact of the matter is, this doesn't prove why you don't like Christmas and how it's xenophobic. This is just proving that the world is a shitty place, not that Christmas is shitty.
Trade liberation also promotes poverty and inequality in many countries.
Citation needed, but please do go on.
For example, a 1997 report by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development documented that trade liberation in Latin America resulted in much bigger wage gaps in unskilled laborers, which is 90% of their workforce, and also increased the rates of unemployment.
That was in the 90s. Can you please give us something more relevant? That was the 90s. It's a completely different time now. We're living in a post-2008 recession world, so something a bit closer to our time would be a lot better for your argument than something that happened in 20 years in the past.
We can also look at corporations like Walmart, which are dependent on the sweatshop labor in underdeveloped countries.
The funny thing is, feminism also supports that because, as you can see from this article that I will link in the description, there was a buzz of these t-shirts said this is what a feminist looks like, and it turns out that these t-shirts or jumpers, I think they were both, were created in sweatshops in East Asia. So please don't be such a hypocrite and complain about corporations and countries using labour, cheap labour, which is horrible and exploitative and it should stop, but neglect to mention that your own movement is also using said people.
The US has also overthrown democratically elected governments in Iran, Nicaragua, Chile, and Guatemala.
Yep, horrible. I dislike that. I'm an historian, I have read up on these events. They're stupid, they should never have happened. It was America flexing its imperialist agenda and grasp on these countries because South America is what they see as their back door, their sphere of influence, and they shouldn't be doing those things. But what has this got to do with Christmas? What exactly has this got to do with your dislike of the holidays? I just don't get it, Jade. I don't get it. This is just an excuse. It's not a reason.
In an effort to support a globalist capitalist structure that benefits the growth of Western domination and prosperity.
You also forget to mention that they were fighting the Soviet Union that were attempting to do their own little thing as well. I mean, they did go into Afghanistan, they did support North Vietnam, and also supported North Korea, but North Korea was actually a legitimate support because the Americans promised the North Vietnamese and the South Vietnamese that there was going to be elections, but instead decided to create South Korea because they couldn't bear the thought of the communists winning in Korea because they were about to win an 80% majority. But still, the fact remains that both countries are at fault for said war. So, never mind. Both sides were doing this. They were in a Cold War. They were in a state of constant fear of each other and of nuclear war that could happen, you know. I'm not saying nuclear war happened, they were constant state of preparedness for it, mutual assured destruction. So in order to spread their influence and to one-up each other, they had to, you know, depose governments that they didn't like and other stuff like that. So it's unfair to blame America for that behaviour when really everyone was doing it.
So when people get upset because people from other countries come to Canada and America to change our way of life, they ignore the fact that our way of life is actually dependent on their deprivation.
That doesn't logically follow. The reason these people are getting upset is because they are bringing values that are not compatible with Western values. They're not. Islam, some of their ideals do not hold up in our society. They just don't. Sharia law is not a great compatible thing here. It's not. Neither is their treatment of women and other stuff. I could go on. The people here aren't actually coming here to change our culture. They're here to work and to find a new life and to assimilate. At least that's what most of them do. So yeah, there is a legitimate concern in regards to Islam, but even then, it depends who you talk to about the severity of it. So, whatever. You're just creating a false equivalence here that doesn't hold up at all.
Next, I think a major issue with xenophobia during the holidays especially is that Canada celebrates the national character of multiculturalism, while America celebrates the ideology of the melting pot.
They're the same thing. At least, in theory, they are the same thing. Why are you complaining about something that is pretty much the same thing? A melting pot is a multicultural society. There's literally no difference. The only difference is the way they view it. I mean, to be honest, a melting pot is kind of different to a multicultural society in a way. It just depends on how the society is built. New York is a melting pot because all the cultures are colliding and they're not necessarily segregated. Whereas if you live in a society where different cultures are segregated due to the fact that they either move to places where they have familiar people or are forced to move there because of governments, which has happened in the past in this country, but less so now, that is maybe a multicultural thing, but it depends on who you talk to. I personally think that the melting pot and the multicultural thing can be one and the same. But yeah, whatever. I think I'm just arguing semantics here. Move on.
Saying Happy Holidays is actually fundamentally more Canadian and arguably American than saying Merry Christmas.
No, it's not. It's bullshit. I mean, let me just give you examples here. I just went to my local Indian takeaway to get a curry, and what did I see? Merry Christmas. Have a Merry Christmas. They have a thing. The other thing is like a little board. They just stuck it up on the wall and said Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. I assume they're Hindus or maybe Muslim, but they might be Hindu. I don't know. And then I was told by my Muslim colleague at work, Merry Christmas. Have a nice Christmas. Have a nice holiday. Neither of us are Christians. I'm an atheist. He's a Muslim. Yet he said Merry Christmas and I said Merry Christmas back because it's what you do at this time of year. I'll say Happy Eid as well. You don't have to say Happy Christmas. You just say Happy whatever to them if it suits that particular time of year. That is what you are supposed to be arguing for. That is more Canadian and British and American than saying Happy Holidays, because Happy Holidays is a euphemism. It's a bullshit term created by social justice warriors because they think they're being racist when they say Merry Christmas.
If we think of the supposed national identity of each country.
The national identities of Canada and the US is heavily influenced by Europe, white Europe to be precise. That is why Christmas is an important part of the year for these countries, because they are based who came to the Americas and were most likely Christian. In fact, they were all Christian. All Christian. That is why they say Merry Christmas and, celebrate Christmas. Because they're influenced by that culture. They're not the same culture anymore because it's now been centuries since the first settlement. So things have changed a bit over there. But that is why they do it. That's why they do it, you fucking idiot. It's not hard to understand. Besides, when you mentioned that we go to all these third world countries and exploit them, a lot of these third world countries are also Christian, or have Christians in them. The Philippines is dominantly Catholic, dominantly so. They say Christmas. I don't think they would be happy with you speaking for them, saying that Happy Holidays is more Canadian or American. What if these people are American or Canadian Filipinos? I think they would be offended by that, don't you think? Also, I know Christian Indians, and they would also be offended by what you just said here. So, please, just fuck off being the arbiter of truth and speaking for all these people that you do not speak for.
Christmas today is about mass consumerism. You can pretend it has a religious factor, but it doesn't.
It doesn't have a religious factor for you or me, but it does for other people. Yes, it is a mass consumer thing now. In fact, it's probably been so for the last couple of centuries now. Buying presents and all that bullshit. But the fact remains, for a lot of people around the world, it is a religious ceremony that they ripped off from the pagans, but never mind. And they feel wholeheartedly, that it is a time of the year where you forgive and you give presents and you're nice to people and you celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ. They do believe that. You're projecting your beliefs onto them. You're projecting. It is still a religious holiday, even if it is a lot more mass produced and more consumerist than it was when it initially began. But so what? So what if it is? There's not a lot you can do about that. Just either not celebrate it and be a bar humbug like me, or force people to stop celebrating it. What are you going to do? You can't force people to not celebrate Christmas. Just ignore it. Ignore it. You're being a killjoy. You are literally the type of person that Fox News always talks about on their annual War Against Christmas specials. You are literally that person that they complain about, and you are fucking embarrassing.
It's about buying as much crap as possible that we don't need, and supporting large corporations.
Well, that's what the corporations want, but that's not what the people buying the goods are thinking when they buy said goods. They are buying goods to give to other people, because that is what you do at Christmas. It is about, helping people. It's about giving presents to people, being nice to people. That is what it is to most people. That is what it is to you, but not to them. Those people aren't thinking the same as you. This is what you social justice warriors constantly forget or just exclude from your thinking.
Christmas originally was a pagan holiday. It evolved from the Roman holiday Santa Manua, a winter festival where men beat their wives, drank a lot of alcohol, and had sex with one another.
Are you seriously trying to out history an historian? Good luck with that, because I know about this, and they did not beat their wives. In fact, women socially mingled with men during this time of the year. It depends largely which part of Roman history you're in, but in some cases, this was a time of year where women and slaves were the freest they'll ever be in the entire year. Slaves could eat and drink and be disrespectful to their masters, and women could have a great time with their men, and do things that they wouldn't normally do with people in society. And it was all about gift giving and all sorts of stuff. It wasn't just a place where they'd have sex and stuff. That was just something that they did alongside it. But they never once beat their wives. There is no historical evidence of them beating their wives. There were gladiatorial battles, but women weren't involved in those things.
Now, honestly, mass consumption of alcohol, mass consumerism, and wife beating kind of seem like better practical characterizations of North American culture.
But you're lying, there was no wife beating on this ceremony. The ceremony was meant to be a joyous occasion. Wife beating is not a joyous occasion. Remember, slaves and women were the freest they'll ever be in the entire year. Women didn't usually hang around in such spaces with men. They were tended to be largely isolated and just stick with the other women, mostly. But apart from this one occasion where they were, it's literally Christmas, but a lot more decadent. That's all it is. People gave gifts to each other. People were nice to each other. It was a time to celebrate. Wife beating kind of, defeats the point of that. And it's not mentioned anywhere. Not even Wikipedia mentions it. Also, if anything, I think Western society is far more tolerant of husband beating than it is of wife beating. You have all these domestic violence shelters and domestic violence helplines. Men have hardly any. In Canada, they've only got one domestic violence shelter, and that has been constantly plagued by feminist protests and attacks. So please, don't go there. And what's wrong with fucking? What's wrong with drinking? I didn't know you were such a bloody Puritan.
Especially compared to diversity, acceptance, and compassion.
I love how you do the exact thing that you accuse these countries of doing. You're stereotyping them, you're being racist, you're being sexist, and you're being generally a horrible piece of shit towards them. Your channel is far more similar to those negative aspects than these countries could ever possibly be. These talking points are the talking points of a bigoted, sheltered arsehole who does not know how the world works and how her own country society lives and how it talks and what it thinks. You just think that they're all the same, like all these individuals who make up the society are the same, and you all think these things. I think you really need to go travelling. You need to go to these third world countries. You need to go to these other Western countries rather than just America and Canada. Hell, just visit other places in America and Canada rather than sticking in your home all day doing videos. And then we'll see if your worldview is exactly the same as it was. And then we will see if you think that all this shit is how it is.
If you choose to celebrate a national identity, then you can't really celebrate liberalism and individualism, for example.
Girl, are we having this again where you just do these stupid things? First you say that a democracy that is capitalistic is hypocritical, and now you're saying that if you celebrate a nationality, you cannot support liberalism. That is so fucking stupid, considering in the 1840s and loads of other revolutions around the world. Hey, just look at your own fucking revolution. And if you're American, I don't know if you're Canadian or not, they were nationalistic, but a lot of them also believed in liberty and diversity and all this bullshit. So, are they hypocritical? I think you'll find that they're not. So stop this stupid false equivalence and this bullshit logic, because it just doesn't work.
While ignoring the formative influence that the ideologies of multiculturalism and the melting pot have had on the national characters of America and Canada.
Speech impediment again. But look, the melting pot and multiculturalism, which is technically the same thing but also slightly different, as I mentioned before, is an essential part of that stuff, girl. Remember, you're nations of immigrants. Well, we're all nations of immigrants, but you guys specifically. That is essential to your history and to your national identity. They're not abandoning that. They are thinking about that. They celebrate that shit. At least the ones that aren't racist. But never mind.
So, to recap, immigrants come to Canada and America because we systematically underdevelop their home countries.
Citation needed on that because I don't see us doing that.
And we should celebrate their cultures and recognize diversity because we claim that we are multicultural places.
We do, but you also realise that Mexicans and Filipinos celebrate Christmas, right? So I don't see how that is contradicting itself with, Canadian Americans and British culture. I don't see how that is, considering they're all fucking Christians.
The way I see it is that when someone says happy holidays, they're choosing to identify with love, respect, and an advocacy for human rights, and a rejection of a celebration of mass consumerism, exploitation, and hypocrisy.
Yeah, they are. It's called social justice, which is exactly what you just described there, that Christmas kind of is, but isn't really at all. God, there's so much irony in your videos. You really are a goldmine. Look, that is what you think Christmas is, but it isn't what the Mexicans and the Filipinos and all the other Christians that come over to other countries for a better life think. They don't think that at all. You're a bloody idiot. You're speaking for people that you know nothing about. You don't know their life experiences. You claim to. You're just thinking about what they are experiencing, but you don't. You know nothing. You're a rich, privileged Marxist. Hell, you're not even a Marxist, really. You're just a social justice warrior. You're just an idiot. You really are just a fucking idiot. God.
Happy holidays.
So, her entire argument consists of Christian countries that are poorer than other Christian countries. Brilliant. Happy holidays, Mexicans and Filipinos, even though you all celebrate Christmas. Hell, even Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs and other religions, they also celebrate Christmas over here and in America and in Canada. Happy holidays is a bullshit thing. Look, you find out what these people celebrate, you find out what the day it is, and you say happy, thingy, whatever, as a mark of respect. You don't need to say happy holidays, alright? So anyway, that's all I'm going to say on the matter. Until next time, I'll see you later, and Merry Christmas.